The wind screamed against the cabin walls like something alive, something furious, and when Daniel pushed open his front door that night, half frozen and half blind from the storm, he found a woman lying unconscious on his living room floor, snow melting off her coat, her lips turning blue, as if death itself had carried her there and left her for him to find. For 3 years, Daniel had lived alone in that cabin at the edge of the pine forest, and in 3 years, no one had ever come. Not a neighbor, not a stranger, not even the mailman during winter months when the roads disappeared under snow. So when he saw her there, sprawled across the wooden floor he had built with his own hands, his heart did something it hadn't done in years. It ached. Not from fear, though there was fear too, but from the sheer impossibility of another human being lying in his home, after so long of being utterly, achingly alone. If you believe in kindness and second chances, hit that like button, drop a comment below, share this video with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel, because the rest of this story is going to touch your heart. Daniel knelt beside her, his hands trembling not from the cold but from the weight of the decision now resting on his shoulders. He could call for help, but the nearest town was 40 minutes away on a good day, and tonight was not a good day. The storm outside had swallowed the roads whole. There was no ambulance coming, no rescue team, no one but him and whatever knowledge he still remembered from the wilderness survival training he had once taken as a younger, more hopeful man. He carried her to the small couch near the fireplace, laid her down gently, and began peeling away her frozen outer layers with the careful urgency of someone who understood that minutes mattered. Her skin was ice beneath his fingers. Her breathing was shallow, barely a whisper of life. He built the fire higher than he ever had, wrapped her in every blanket he owned, and sat beside her through the night, checking her pulse every few minutes, terrified that each check would be the one where he found nothing at all. He did not sleep. He watched the flames dance shadows across her face, a face he did not recognize, a face that belonged to no one he had ever known in this remote corner of the world. She looked to be in her 30s, dark hair damp against her forehead, delicate features hardened by exhaustion and cold. He wondered who she was, where she had come from, why a woman would be wandering alone through a blizzard in the middle of nowhere. But mostly, as the hours passed and her breathing slowly steadied, he wondered why his chest felt so tight, why his hands wouldn't stop shaking even after the immediate danger seemed to pass. He hadn't cared about another person's survival in longer than he could remember. He had almost forgotten what it felt like to hope for someone besides himself. Daniel had not always been a man who lived in isolation. Once he had a life full of noise and color, a marriage that had promised forever, a career in the city that had given him purpose. But 3 years ago, everything had collapsed within the span of a single terrible season. His wife Claire had died in a car accident on a rain-soaked highway, taken instantly, without warning, without the chance for him to say the things he had always assumed he had time to say. The grief had not simply broken him. It had hollowed him out entirely, until he no longer recognized the man staring back at him in the mirror. He had sold their home, quit his job, and retreated to this cabin his grandfather had built decades ago, convincing himself that solitude was the only place where his pain could not follow him. He had been wrong, of course. Pain followed him everywhere. But at least out here, no one had to witness it. By morning, the woman began to stir. Her eyelids fluttered, and when they finally opened, she stared up at the unfamiliar wooden ceiling with pure disoriented panic. Daniel spoke softly, telling her she was safe, that she had collapsed in the storm and he had brought her inside, that she was in his cabin and there was nothing to fear. Her name, she eventually managed to say through cracked lips, was Elena. She had been driving through the mountain pass when her car slid off the road, and after abandoning the vehicle, she had wandered through the storm searching for any sign of shelter, any light in the endless white darkness, until her body simply gave out. She remembered stumbling toward what she thought was a light, and then nothing more. The days that followed were unlike anything Daniel had experienced in years. The blizzard raged on, trapping them both inside the cabin, cutting off any possibility of leaving until the roads cleared. At first, the silence between them was heavy, awkward. Two strangers forced into proximity by circumstances neither had chosen. Elena was weak for the first 2 days, her body recovering from hypothermia, and Daniel tended to her with a quiet diligence, bringing her warm broth, checking her temperature, keeping the fire burning through each long night. He did not ask too many questions, and she did not offer too many answers. But slowly, inevitably, conversation began to fill the spaces between them. She told him she had been driving to see her estranged sister, a reconciliation attempt years in the making after a falling out neither of them had ever properly healed from. She spoke of regret, of wasted time, of how the accident had made her realize how fragile the chance to make things right truly was. Daniel listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't listened to anyone since Claire's death. And somewhere in the listening, something inside him that had been frozen solid for 3 years began, almost imperceptibly, to thaw. He found himself talking too, haltingly at first, then with more openness than he had shown another living soul in years. He told her about Claire, about the accident, about the guilt that gnawed at him every single day for words unsaid and time he had taken for granted. He told her about the friends who had stopped calling because he never called back, about the family who had given up trying to reach him, about how he had built walls so high around his heart that he had convinced himself he preferred it that way. Elena did not offer empty platitudes or rush to fix his pain. She simply sat with him in it, nodding, understanding, occasionally sharing her own losses, her own fears, until the cabin that had once felt like a tomb began to feel, however briefly, like something closer to a sanctuary. There was a night, deep into the storm, when the power flickered and died, leaving them with only firelight and candles scattered across the small room. Elena sat wrapped in blankets near the hearth, and Daniel found himself studying her face in the amber glow, struck by how alive the room felt with her presence in it. She caught him watching, and, instead of looking away, she smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile that reached her eyes despite everything she had been through. In that moment, Daniel felt something crack open inside his chest, not with pain this time, but with the terrifying, unfamiliar sensation of possibility. He had not allowed himself to feel anything close to hope since Claire died, had actively guarded against it, believing that hope was simply grief's cruel setup for another devastating fall. But here it was anyway, uninvited and undeniable. The storm did not relent easily. Days stretched into nearly a week, and with each passing day the two of them built something neither had expected. They cooked together in the small kitchen, sharing stories of childhood and mistakes and dreams long abandoned. They read old books from Daniel's shelves aloud to each other when the isolation grew too heavy for silence. They argued once, briefly, about something trivial that was really about something much deeper, about the fear both of them carried of letting anyone close enough to hurt them again. And in resolving that small argument, they crossed some invisible threshold into a trust that felt both fragile and unbreakable at once. Elena helped Daniel see things about himself he had refused to acknowledge in 3 years of self-imposed exile. She pointed out gently but honestly that survival was not the same as living, that he had confused isolation with healing when really he had simply been hiding, that Claire would not have wanted him to spend the rest of his life punishing himself for a tragedy that was never his fault. Her words cut deep, deeper than he expected, but they did not wound him the way similar words from others once had. Instead, they felt like permission he had been waiting 3 long years for someone to give him, permission to finally begin grieving properly instead of simply existing in suspended pain. On the 6th day, the storm finally began to break. Sunlight cut through the clouds for the first time in what felt like forever, illuminating a world blanketed in pristine, undisturbed snow. Daniel stood at the window watching the light spill across the landscape, and he felt an ache in his chest that was different from the ache of grief he had carried for so long. This was the ache of knowing something beautiful was about to end, that the roads would clear, that rescue teams would eventually find Elena's abandoned car, that the outside world would inevitably pull them back into their separate lives. When the sound of a snowplow finally echoed faintly in the distance 2 days later, Elena's eyes filled with tears that surprised them both. She admitted, voice trembling, that she had spent the last week feeling more like herself than she had in years, that something about the cabin, about him, about the strange gift of the storm that trapped them together, had cracked open a part of her heart she thought had closed forever after her own losses. Daniel took her hands in his, feeling the same fear and hope tangled together inside his chest, and told her that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to want tomorrow to come. For 3 years he had simply been surviving each day, waiting for nothing, hoping for nothing. She had changed that without even trying. Before she left, standing in the doorway with the mountain rescue vehicle waiting in the newly cleared driveway, Elena turned back to him one final time. She told him that some people believe storms only destroy, but she had learned that sometimes storms are simply the universe's strange way of forcing two broken people to finally stop and see each other. She asked for his number, told him she intended to call the moment she reached her sister's home safely, and reminded him that this was not goodbye, only the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find in the middle of a blizzard. Months later, Daniel's cabin no longer felt like a tomb. The walls he had built around his heart, the same walls that had kept him safe and suffocated for 3 long years, had finally begun to come down, not because grief disappeared, but because he had learned through Elena that healing was never about forgetting the people you lost. It was about allowing yourself to live again without guilt, about understanding that opening your heart to someone new did not betray the love you once had. Claire would always be part of his story, but she was no longer the reason he refused to write the next chapter. Elena visited often after that winter, and slowly, carefully, 2 people who had both been drowning in their own private storms learned how to build something steady together, something built not on the ashes of what they lost, but on the strange, undeniable grace of what they had found. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel, because we bring you more heartfelt stories just like this one all the time. And before you go, drop a comment and let us know which country you're watching from tonight. We'd love to know where in the world you're joining us from. Sometimes, life takes everything from us, only to give us something we never could have imagined. All we have to do is keep our hearts open.